Fury as entitled sunseekers turn Hampstead Heath wildlife ponds into a beach club during nesting season. A wave of anger has erupted among locals, wildlife campaigners, and animal welfare advocates after crowds of Heatwave revealers descended on the protected ponds of the Hampstead Heath and allegedly transformed the sensitive wildlife areas into what critics described as a beach club. Now let's make a deeper look and uncover every layer of this story on our AI podcast.
Picture this. It's May, right? And Britain is just baking in this absolutely record-breaking heat wave.
Oh, completely suffocating. Just inescapable.
Yeah, exactly. We're talking 95-degree heat. And right in the middle of this, the Royal National Lifeboat Institution issues this really urgent warning to the public. And honestly, it sounds completely counterintuitive.
Right, the one about freezing to death?
Yes. They literally told everyone who was, desperately seeking relief in the water to beware of freezing to death on a 95-degree day.
Which, it sounds like a paradox, right?
Absolutely.
But it actually gets to the absolute core of the physiological environmental chaos that happens when human beings are pushed past their thermal limits. The desperation to cool down just completely overrides basic situational awareness.
And that tension, that clash between our primal human need for relief and the fragile environments we plunge into to get it, that's our mission for today's deep dive. We've got a whole stack of sources here: wildlife reports, meteorological data, eyewitness accounts, some legal analyses, and they're all centered on a very specific crisis that unfolded at London's Hampstead Heath.
Yeah, it's a wild story.
It really is. So we aren't just recapping a weather event today for you. We're exploring the underlying psychology of heat-induced panic. We're examining the invisible ecological destruction caused by these crowds, and we're asking a pretty critical question. When temperatures soar to these dangerous levels, how do we balance human enjoyment with the survival of urban wildlife? Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, so to really understand the behavior at the Hampstead Heath ponds, we first have to look at the mechanics of the heat wave itself, because this wasn't just, a warm spring day.
Right, this was extreme.
Very extreme. We're talking about 35.1 degrees Celsius at Kew Gardens, which is well over 95 degrees Fahrenheit, and like 32.9 degrees at Butte Park. But the daytime highs, they really only tell part of the story. The real psychological toll came from what meteorologists call tropical nights.
Right, which basically means the temperature just simply never drops below 20 degrees Celsius overnight.
Exactly. And that is crucial because it strips away the environment's ability to reset. In an urban environment like London, buildings and pavement act like giant thermal batteries.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, they absorb the solar radiation all day long, and then during a tropical night, they just radiate all that heat back out. The human body actually requires a drop in ambient temperature to properly regulate its circadian rhythms to recover from the heat stress.
So you need that nighttime cooling just to function.
Right, and when that doesn't happen, you end up with an entire population operating in this state of basically chronic physiological alarm.
Wow. And you can actually see that alarm reflected in the national infrastructure, too. Like the sources mention steel rail tracks being at a severe risk of buckling.
Yeah, that was a huge issue.
It forced rail operators to implement emergency speed restrictions across the board. And just, thinking about the physics of that. The ambient air is coming 5 degrees, but the dark steel of the tracks is absorbing all that direct sunlight, heating up to maybe 50 degrees or more.
Easily 50 degrees.
The thermal expansion is so powerful, it literally warps solid metal.
It does. And, if thermal expansion can warp solid steel, you can imagine what that level of environmental stress does to human behavior.
Right, for sure.
It drives massive crowds to any available blue space. Beaches, lakes, rivers, ponds, you name it. Which loops us back to that counterintuitive warning from the Lifeboat Institution about cold water shock.
Yeah, I really want to break down the mechanism of that. Because on a 95-degree day, jumping into a freezing cold lake feels like the exact cure you need, Why is it so dangerous?
So it has to do with the extreme delta-like, the difference between your skin temperature and the water temperature. When you're baking in the hot sun, your blood vessels dilate to bring heat to the surface of your skin to cool you down.
Right, you're flushed and sweating.
Exactly. So if you suddenly plunge into water that hasn't warmed up yet, say water that's still sitting at maybe 12 or 15 degrees, it triggers this massive involuntary physiological response.
Like a shock to the system.
A literal shock.
Mm-hmm.
The blood vessels constrict violently to preserve your core heat. And this sudden change, it dramatically spikes your blood pressure and forces a gasp reflex.
Oh, wow. So you just inhale involuntarily.
Yeah, exactly. Even Olympic-level swimmers can inhale water and drown in minutes under those conditions. It was so bad that the National Fire Chiefs Council had to put out urgent bulletins for parents to watch their children because open water was functionally a hazard zone.
That is terrifying. And that acute nationwide panic paints a very clear picture of the mindset people were in when they descended on the wildlife ponds at Hampstead Heath. According to the reports, thousands of people flocked there. And the visual here, I mean, it's less like a typical day at a quiet nature reserve and more like an Ibiza beach club just dropped out of the sky into a protected wetland.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's a sudden and extreme shift in land use, driven entirely by human thermal desperation.
Right, because people were in bikinis and swim shorts, completely ignoring these massive bright yellow signs explicitly stating no swimming.
Just walking right past them.
Yeah, they were hauling in giant inflatable rafts, throwing beach balls around, blasting music, and they were bringing dogs, which, by the way, the facility normally requires to be strictly tethered outside the area, right into the water with them.
Well, prolonged extreme heat fundamentally alters the psychology of a crowd. It creates this temporary suspension of social contracts.
Like the rules just don't apply anymore?
Exactly. When a person's experiencing that level of physiological alarm we talked about, their cognitive bandwidth narrows entirely to immediate relief. The environment stops being perceived as a complex living ecosystem. It gets stripped of its ecological context, basically.
It's just a pool to them.
Right, it's reduced to a commodity. In the minds of that crowd, the Hampstead Heath Pond was no longer a delicate habitat. It was simply a free, available resource for rapid cooling.
So the biological drive to cool off completely short-circuits their civic responsibility. But, while thousands of people were treating the area like an aquatic playground, they were actively dismantling the lives of the pond's permanent residents. And the timing here is a crucial factor, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It was perhaps the most ecologically sensitive window of the whole year. Mid-May is peak nesting season for urban waterfowl.
And the sources specifically highlight that swans had successfully raised cygnets at these ponds for the first time in several years. Plus, there were ducklings and chicks everywhere that were only days or weeks old.
Right. And a nesting bird operates on an incredibly tight, precarious energy budget. Leading up to May, a swan has spent weeks building up fat reserves and incubating eggs, which, requires keeping those eggs at a very precise temperature.
So they can't just leave whenever they want.
No, not at all. Every time a parent bird is forced off that nest, the eggs are exposed to the elements, and the biological clock starts ticking. These birds are already hypervigilant, so when you suddenly introduce splashing humans, giant plastic inflatables, and loose dogs into their immediate vicinity,
It's chaos.
you're essentially dropping a parade of apex predators directly into a nursery.
The eyewitness accounts describe some incredibly intense scenes. There's a report of a young person trying to literally climb over an active swan nesting site just to reach an island in the middle of the pond.
Unbelievable.
And they had to be physically intercepted. And then there's that footage that circulated online showing a visibly distressed swan swimming in all the chaos, just gently nudging an unhatched egg that was floating in the water after falling out of the nest.
Yeah, that specific visual of the floating egg illustrates the ultimate breaking point of the stress response. I mean, swans are famously protective, right?
Oh, yeah, they can be aggressive.
Very. But they evaluate threats based on proximity and scale. When an overwhelming threat like, say, a human scaling their nest or a dog paddling toward them crosses a certain threshold, the parent's survival instinct kicks in.
They realize they can't win.
Exactly. They're forced to calculate whether defending the nest is futile, and if it is, they flee, abandoning the eggs or leaving newly hatched chicks entirely unprotected.
Which is just heartbreaking. A visitor named Cian Whitehead reported seeing someone actually sit inside a swan nest as a joke, which resulted in the parent birds abandoning it completely. And I struggle to understand this behavior. Are people genuinely acting out of malice here, or is this a devastating byproduct of profound ignorance? Do they just have zero concept of the damage they're doing?
Well, malice requires a deliberate intent to cause harm, which frankly might explain someone sitting in a nest as a joke. But the broader, widespread chaos, the inflatables, the crowding, what's fascinating here is that it's largely driven by profound ecological illiteracy. The average person simply does not understand the spatial dynamics of a pond. They look at a large body of water and assume, oh, the birds can just swim away to the other side.
Right, there's plenty of room, supposedly.
But what they fail to realize is that human noise and physical crowding act as a barrier.
Like an invisible fence in the water.
Exactly. An acoustic and visual wall forcing the wildlife into increasingly condensed areas. The birds get physically trapped in the smaller margins of the pond. And by doing that, the crowd is cutting off the birds' access to their natural foraging grounds.
So they can't even eat.
Right. You're trapping them in zones where there might not be sufficient aquatic vegetation to eat or even adequate shade to hide from the midday sun. So it's not just a nuisance. It forces an immediate survival crisis where they can neither feed themselves nor protect their young.
And introducing dogs into that equation just accelerates the crisis exponentially. Because to a nesting swan, a golden retriever splashing in the water isn't someone's beloved pet cooling off. It's a wolf.
Exactly. A dog's presence triggers an immense cortisol spike in waterfowl. It represents an immediate lethal threat, which is why dog intrusions are one of the leading catalysts for instant nest abandonment.
So when you have hundreds of people creating this invisible fence of noise and stress, forcing a survival crisis for the wildlife, the obvious question is, where are the authorities? I mean, if people are blatantly ignoring massive yellow signs and displacing protected animals, there has to be a legal framework being violated here, right?
Oh, the legal framework is actually quite stringent. Under the UK's Wildlife and Countryside Act of 1981, it is entirely illegal to intentionally or recklessly disturb wild birds while they are building a nest or while they are in, on, or near a nest containing eggs or young.
And the penalties aren't minor either. The sources note this carries fines of up to £1,000.
Yep, up to £1,000 per offense. But, a law only exists in practice if it is enforced, and the enforcement during this specific heat wave completely collapsed.
Yeah, an advocacy group, an Instagram account called Swans of Hampstead Heath, documented this collapse in real time. They publicly accused the City of London Corporation, which is the municipal governing body responsible for managing the Heath, of totally failing to protect the ecosystem.
The footage they shared was pretty damning.
It was. They reported that officers would arrive, instruct swimmers to exit the water, and the very moment the officers turned their backs, the crowds just waded right back in.
Yeah, and this brings us to a fascinating, albeit frustrating, psychological mechanism regarding crowd policing. It's often related to the bystander effect or the breakdown of normative influence.
How so?
Well, in a public space, if 10 people break a rule and face no immediate consequences, the 11th person subconsciously assumes the rule is suspended. Once a critical mass of people normalizes an illegal behavior like swimming in a protected pond, individual deterrents lose their power entirely.
The officers just get overwhelmed.
Exactly. The municipal officers face an impossible numbers game. I mean, they cannot physically process £1,000 fines for 500 people simultaneously. So they issue verbal warnings, which the crowd quickly identifies as hollow.
Animal welfare expert Andrew Knight was highly critical of this dynamic.
Yeah.
He argued that because meaningful penalties weren't being issued on the spot, the deterrent effect was reduced to zero. And he asked a really pointed question. Has public enjoyment officially superseded wildlife protection?
It's a question that resonates far beyond local London politics, honestly.
It definitely resonated globally. I saw that tennis legend Martina Navratilova weighed in on this. She's apparently swum at the ladies' pond at the Heath in the past, so she knows the area well.
Oh, right.
Yeah, she reposted the footage of the chaos and labeled it ignorance for all to see. And I'm struggling to understand how a localized enforcement issue at a London pond escalates so fast that a global sports icon feels compelled to intervene. What is it about this specific space that triggers that level of protectiveness?
It speaks to the psychological concept of shared ownership of sacred natural spaces. Hampstead Heath isn't just a park. For centuries, it's been an iconic refuge within one of the world's densest metropolises.
It's an institution, really.
It is. So when someone like Navratilova sees footage of that refuge being degraded, it triggers a universal frustration. It represents a broader global anxiety about our inability to protect fragile ecosystems from our own consumption.
And the frustration from local campaigners wasn't just about the officers losing control of the crowd on the day of the heat wave. I mean, meteorologists had been broadcasting the arrival of these 35-degree temperatures and tropical nights for days. The campaigners argued that the city should have used that lead time to implement preventative infrastructure.
Like setting up physical barriers, increasing staffing.
Exactly. Preparing proactive ticketing systems long before the first inflatable raft even arrived.
Yeah, it's the classic struggle of proactive management versus reactive mitigation. And the failure to be proactive here reveals a stunning contradiction in how the municipal body allocates its resources.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. This might be the most ironic detail in all of our sources. While this total free-for-all is happening and birds are fleeing their nests in panic, there is a 50,000 pounds conservation project unfolding at the exact same time right nearby at the model boating pond on the Heath.
Right. And the project is being spearheaded by Gregory Jones, a King's Counsel, which is a highly senior lawyer in the UK system. That title alone indicates the level of municipal and legal weight behind this initiative.
But the entire purpose of this 50,000-pound project is to physically separate an island habitat from public access, specifically to create an undisturbed sanctuary for nesting birds.
The irony is just glaring.
It's the ecological equivalent of spending a fortune to build a high-tech vault to protect your jewelry while actively holding the front door of your house wide open for robbers during a riot. They are funding a fortress for wildlife in one pond, while standing by as an established natural sanctuary right next door gets totally overrun.
It really exposes a massive structural flaw in urban environmental planning. The project led by the King's Counsel involves physical interventions, right? Like dredging, creating reed beds, building physical barriers.
Infrastructure.
Exactly. But it assumes a static environment. If your management strategy cannot account for the dynamic, volatile shifts in human behavior during an extreme weather event, those long-term investments are rendered completely useless in a single afternoon.
Which brings us to a layer of destruction that most people in that crowd probably never even considered. The visible chaos, the abandoned eggs, the splashing dogs, the noise. That's only half the story. The physical force of hundreds of people wading into that shallow water actually triggers a microscopic chain reaction that destroys the pond from the bottom up.
This is such a critical distinction to make. A natural pond is fundamentally different from a municipal swimming pool. A pool is a sterile concrete bowl filled with treated, chlorinated water.
Right.
A wildlife pond is a highly complex, delicate, living matrix. When hundreds of humans and dogs repeatedly trample the shallow margins, they aren't just splashing water. They're inflicting severe structural trauma on the ecosystem.
The reports focus heavily on the churning up of sediment. Now, for anyone who doesn't study aquatic biology, that just sounds like, making the water muddy. How does muddy water cause structural trauma?
Well, ecologists refer to this as turbidity, and it sets off a cascading failure in the water column. When years of settled silt and mud are kicked up, it creates this dense, opaque cloud in the water that blocks sunlight from penetrating beneath the surface.
Like drawing a curtain over the pond.
Pretty much. And aquatic plants, which form the foundational architecture of the pond, require that sunlight for photosynthesis. If the water remains highly turbid for several days due to constant crowd activity, those plants begin to suffocate and die.
Wow. So you're killing the plant life just by walking around.
Yes. And it gets worse. That undisturbed sediment at the bottom of the pond is largely anoxic, meaning it lacks oxygen and contains trapped gases and decomposing organic matter.
Okay.
When human feet churn that up, anaerobic bacteria that live deep down in the mud are suddenly exposed to the wider water column, and those bacteria rapidly consume the dissolved oxygen in the water.
Which everything else needs to breathe.
Exactly. This sudden drop in oxygen levels can be absolutely lethal to the fish, the amphibians, and the aquatic invertebrates. You are effectively suffocating the base of the food chain, severely degrading the water quality long after the crowds have packed up their inflatables and gone home.
So what does this all mean? For you listening, I really want you to think about this the next time you find yourself seeking out a natural space to cool off on a blisteringly hot day. Whether it's a hidden lake, a local river, or a protected pond. Did you ever realize that simply standing in the shallows, just your feet resting on the bottom, could be fundamentally altering the chemical makeup, depleting the oxygen levels, and threatening the physical safety of that entire aquatic ecosystem?
This raises an important question, doesn't it? It requires a complete paradigm shift in how we view our relationship with urban nature. We're witnessing a fundamental escalating friction between a human being's perceived right to access nature for comfort and nature's inherent right to exist undisturbed.
And locals are noticing the shift.
Yeah, local residents are sounding the alarm that Hampstead Heath is undergoing this forced identity shift. It is devolving from a vital, peaceful wildlife sanctuary into an impromptu party hotspot for people traveling from all across the city. And that identity crisis is being directly fueled by the changing climate.
Because when a concrete city turns into a 35-degree oven and the tropical nights prevent anyone from sleeping, people are going to flock to the water, regardless of what the yellow signs say.
Precisely. And the meteorological data confirms this heat wave was not a one-off anomaly. As global climate patterns shift, These extreme heat events, the blistering daytime highs, the suffocating tropical nights, they are increasing in both frequency and intensity. The thermal pressure on our urban green spaces and blue spaces is going to grow exponentially.
It really paints a demanding picture for the future of conservation in our cities. We've seen exactly how fast the social contract breaks down, how quickly an ecosystem can be trampled when human comfort is on the line, and how systemic policing issues render current enforcement measures completely ineffective.
It requires municipal governments to completely rethink their management models.
Yeah.
I mean, we can no longer rely on the honor system or, static 50,000 pounds infrastructure projects to protect wildlife when primal survival instincts take over a population.
It has been a truly eye-opening deep dive into the intersection of extreme climate, human psychology, and urban ecology. We've traced this crisis from the sweltering 95-degree heat that warped steel tracks and drove people to the edge of panic, to the tragic abandonment of nests, the systemic failure of a 1,000-pound legal deterrent, and that microscopic ecological breakdown hidden just beneath the surface of the muddy water. As we wrap up our analysis of these sources, I want to leave you with a thought to mull over. We started this discussion by stepping into the intense, inescapable heat of our record-breaking May. A heat so profound it drove thousands of desperate people to seek relief in the fragile waters of Hampstead Heath. As global temperatures inevitably continue to rise and these blistering extremes become the new normal rather than the exception, our human instinct will always be to seek refuge in the cool embrace of nature. But if our urban parks and wildlife ponds become our designated lifeboats during extreme heat, will our desperate, chaotic need for relief ultimately sink the very sanctuaries we are trying to escape to? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Catch you next
Okay, one question for you. Did the heatwave justify people ignoring wildlife protection rules at Hampstead Heath, or should stricter enforcement and heavy fines have been introduced before the crowds arrived? Don't forget to comment it. Thanks.